This lecture is about Gerard Hauser's first chapter in his text, Introduction to Rhetorical Theory. The chapter is called The Eventfulness of Rhetoric. I really like Hauser's notion of rhetorical events, and it's going to be a notion that I use to construct a context and a situation for this class. Often when we think of rhetoric, we think of of a text. I think particularly in English departments, we think of rhetoric as speeches, as written text. And I want us to get away from the notion of an artifact, the notion of let's pick up a book and find the rhetoric in that book. Instead of as a text, and note that a text is a static thing, a thing that's recorded and imprisoned, is no longer in the flux of time, that things aren't changing and moving. And if we use Hauser's understanding of rhetoric, we can't really use the notion of a static text to describe what he sees going. So what is rhetoric? So we can talk about texts, we can talk about events, but what about rhetoric or rhetorical events and texts? Rhetoric, he says, is concerned with the use of symbols to induce social action. Now keep in mind that we can induce social action in a lot of different ways. If we think of benign ways of inducing social action, we might think of children and think of, let's say, a toddler, a child too young to fully understand language. And, we might use language. We might say no, or we might call the child's name. But we might also see that the child's getting into something that we don't want them into, and so we might distract them and show them something else. I.e., we use a physical object to distract their attention. It's not a symbol. We're not using a ball to stand for don't play with the glass paperweight. Instead, we're actually using a form of force, a benign force, a physical sort of motion. We use force at all different levels, from the benign to the extremely threatening and outright violent. So we might use a gun to get someone to give us all the money in their purse. And while that gun can be a symbol, that gun can serve to represent the individual as, look, I'm strong, I'm powerful. If we actually are using that gun to get what we want, let's say we shoot the first person and then the next person will give us their money, that's not really a symbol. It's actually an act of force. So rhetoric then is concerned with the use of symbols to induce social action. Symbols might be words, symbols might be colors, symbols might be a variety of things. If we think about the ways that we encourage social action at a sporting event, for instance, we have cheerleaders dressed in certain colors, and people who are members of a certain team have a certain mascot, and we might be holding the mascot and wearing the colors to indicate that we're a part of the team. And the cheerleaders will shake a pom-pom and make some sort of rhythmic statement to indicate support and so on. And it's through these actions and through these colors and through these movements that we create the social action of supporting a team. So symbols can be used for serious things, for entertainment, for a variety of different things. They can be words, they can be actions, they can be colors and sounds, lots of different things. Okay, now Hauser distinguishes among things, events, and processes. Gerard Hauser comes out of a communication department as opposed to out of an English department. And we see that rhetoric is taught by both departments. There are times when I very much side with the communication way of doing things, and this is one. I think in English we like to think of rhetoric as a thing, and particularly if we have a background in literature. That is, it's a text. It's something that we can put inside a book, we can read it, we can access it. We can look at Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and that's it. It's a thing that we can see. Things exist in space. They can be touched and described and held in our hands. Events, in contrast, take place in time. So they tend to be present tense. They're in motion. Events are related to processes in the sense that processes are those things that unfold. They are continuous. They are these, one thing after another. They often have cause and effect. They're a series of things. They are episodic in that way. Now, the thing that we notice about processes is that they tend to be continuous. Most of our life, we're surrounded by continuous processes. The sun rises, the sun sets. In between, we might have rain, we might have snow, we might have windstorms. But the continuity is that thing that happens when everything goes along in a way that it should, in a way that we expect it to. When something happens that we don't expect to have happen in that normal process, then we tend to think of those gaps, those discontinuities as events, as eventful. They have causes, they occur, and they have outcomes, as Hauser says, that are consequential for the future. Now, the discontinuity of processes, these events that exist within the continuous, that disrupt the continuous. This, Hauser says, is the culture, and by culture we might even want to think of the biological notion of culture. This is the surrounding or the context in which rhetoric germinates. This is where we find the need for social action. Discontinuities that invite rhetorical acts are also events, Hauser says. So if we're trying to understand what a rhetorical event is, we're looking at that discontinuity that begs for us or invites us to have a rhetorical response. So recently in the South Carolina primary, we heard a lot about Mitt Romney being predicted to win that event. And lo and behold, Newt Gingrich wins that event. Now, what we do when that happens is we have this event, Newt Gingrich wins the primary, and then we want to go back and seek what caused that win. A lot of people are going back and looking at the debate in which he was very strong in his response to the media. And then we want to look at the impact of that for the future. That invites us to have a rhetorical act of some sort. And we can respond in a number of ways. Hauser says that there's 6 modes of rhetorical action we can take. And he describes those as situated action, symbolic action, as transactions, as social action, strategic action, and constitutive action. I'm not going to go through each one of those. We can talk about those in class. But these are ways of thinking about what sorts of rhetorical invitations are issued when we have a break in the action. Hauser concludes this chapter by saying that rhetoric is a practical art. Now, he gets that terminology from Aristotle, who divides the world of knowledge up into 3 groups, and one of those is the practical art. There are a lot of different answers to the question, what kind of art is rhetoric? But Hauser lands on this one, that it's a practical art. I don't necessarily fully agree with that, but for right now, I think what we should emphasize is that rhetoric is a method for Hauser, and it's a practice. It's something that we do, that we learn in order to achieve something down the road. So this rhetorical method, which is a very Aristotelian notion, this way or strategy or approach to participating in rhetorical ways in the future. So the thing I want you to focus on mostly from this chapter is the notion of what a rhetorical event might be. In class, we're going to be talking a lot about what a rhetorical event looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and trying to contrast an event with a text and a speech. We'll also talk about rhetoric as method, which is a definition of rhetoric that I like very much, and we can think about what implications using that term has. Please write down questions and let me know what you have questions about, and let's discuss this further in class. Thanks very much.